Hey fellow gamers and painters, before we go into this week's video, I wanted to point out to my Patreon supporters that this month's giveaway for June of 2019 is going to be this Governor's Mansion from Printable Scenery. I wanted to quickly note though that instead of waiting until the last day of the month, I will be doing the raffle drawing on Wednesday the 26th because I'm leaving for a work trip that's going to go over the last of the month. Alright, so now on to the video. So welcome to Painting Without a Noob. Roger is on vacation and so he's going to be gone for a couple of weeks. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and forge ahead because we have so many miniatures to get painted done. I do apologize. I know it's great to have his perspective as a noob, but hopefully when he comes back, he'll be able to join us as well. But this episode, we're getting a lot done. We're going to be taking on the Werewolf, fairly easy paint job there, and the Bowmen. Those are hard because there are 30 of them, so that's the biggest part of the army that you're getting in the base set. We're also going to be taking on the mounted Bowmen, so doing horses for the first time, as well as the Seargents-at-Arms. We're going to finish those up. Those are actually pretty easy to paint. And then also we're going to do our first heroes. So this mounted hero, who can be multiple different heroes that you can play for either side. Look at all of these cards for just that figure alone. I'll also be showing you how to do transfer decals onto shields, and I'll show you too the protective spray varnish that I put on my miniatures. We're going to do a little bit of a compare and contrast with my go-to matte primer, which is Tester's Dull Coat, and a new one that I've heard of, which is Krylon's Frosted Spray. So follow along with me. Alright, we're going to work on the Bowmen. And as usual, going from deepest to most shallow, we're going to do the skin first. And really, they're so small that I'm just putting blobs of flesh color where the face is at and where the two hands are at. And I'll be doing the black primed and the gray primed side by side. Since we already primed these, and again you can see the difference between gray primer and black primer. Next I'm going to do the cloak with this forest green. Do the black one first. I'm going to switch brushes with a finer brush to get in between his belt. Here's this one. Go ahead and cover the belt. Next I'm going to do olive green for the neck cape. I don't know what that is actually, but it's this thing back here. I already painted here on this guy. I don't know if that's chainmail or what that is, but at least on the Bowmen card, it's this some kind of helmet baklava or something. So I don't think it's chainmail. Yeah, I think that's it. You might wonder, why did I use my miniature paint here versus the craft paint? It's really because of what color I have. And as you can see, I also want to show you guys that using craft paint is viable. In our first video, a couple people commented and said don't use craft paint, but I'm not entirely sure why. But it definitely, you can use craft paint. Next I'm going to use Harvest Brown, and this is going to be for the belt. And then also the arrow. And don't forget the arrows down here. And then finally the shoes. I gotta put some slate gray onto the pile of stones where the arrows are stuck into. And so obviously I only need to do it for the black primed figures. And I don't know if that is supposed to be stone or dirt, but whatever. I'm going to use tanned leather for the bow. I'm going to use rusty red for the feathers and the arrows, but also his sort of leather guard for his forearm, like that. There. Then finally, plate mail metal for the helmet. Again, I'm intentionally leaving the black that functions as a dividing line, so that we're getting shading in there. So I purposefully don't go all the way to the edge. And even here, because the primer is gray, I can just touch the top and be okay with that. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and use the dark tone wash with the ones that were primed in gray. Alright, we'll let that dry. See what it looks like after. Okay, so the last step here is to color the base. And as always, I'm using avocado craft paint, since that's the color of all of our bases. Make sure to look at the end of episode 2.5 if you haven't seen how I color my bases. And the gray, I'm glad to say, does take the paint really well. You don't need a second coat like you do when we primed with white. But it is a little tricky to get in here in between the feet and the pile of arrows. You just gotta work at it from both sides. So let's go ahead and take a look at these comparisons between the ones that were primed in black and the ones in gray that were washed. And so as you can tell right away, the one here to the left has higher contrast. And so in the areas right here with the black, there's an outline, and the colors also are brighter. The reason for that is because with the wash, you have the tones muted because the wash covers the whole thing, and so it dulls the color just a little bit. And so the contrast is going to be higher with this guy because there was no wash that was put over it. But let's go ahead and flip them over, and you can see a difference here in the cloth of the cloak, and you can tell that the wash created subtle shading in the cloak in particular, whereas here on the left there is a little bit of shading that happens with the cloak because just of the black undercoating and the difference of how much paint got on. So clearly the shading wins out here on the right. But let's go ahead and take a look at these guys from a tabletop perspective when we're not this close to looking at the miniatures and see if we can spot a difference. So here it is taking a look at it from a more regular height. And I would say that you can spot some differences, but for the most part, it's pretty darn hard to figure out that there were two different methods that were used. So some of the higher contrast you can tell in the faces, because the ones in black, there's no real distinguishing features from the eyes or the mouth or anything like that. And you get a little bit more from those that were shaded, but not a whole lot. And the difference is much more apparent with the skeleton. So you can clearly tell that these were based black and then these were just washed. But the interesting thing with the skeletons was Roger and I did an experiment where instead of washing in the soft tone, which was what was done here, we washed these in the dark tone. And also these guys were washed in dark tone too. And you can tell that it's closer between the two. With the black wash, it's still distinguishable, I think, between this guy back here that was primed black and these guys that were just washed with dark tone. But here you can really tell a difference with the soft tone because the shading on this is a lot lighter. So all that to say, I think it is up to individual preference what you're looking for. And moving forward, because there isn't a big difference between the primed models, I think I'm going to go ahead and prime primarily in black, because priming in black takes away a step of washing. Even though it's just one step, over time it's a lot more work. So for the most part, I'm going to prime in black from now on, with the exception of larger models. But it's really up to you, sort of what do you want to see on your tabletop and what's the style that you want. Alright, for the werewolf, we're going to basically dry brush. I primed it black and going to dry brush with this zinc. And I like this zinc color because it is pretty dark gray. And so with the highlights of this, we're just going to very lightly just brush over it. And I know it's hard to see on camera because it's so subtle. And one of the things that happens when we spray this with the dull coat, the gray actually darkens in color. So even though it might look pretty light right now, we just keep that in mind that when we dull coat it, it will actually lighten up. But this is generally what I do with things that are black, creatures that are black, or I'm going to make one of the horses, a couple of the horses black, and all I do is just dry brush this gray on top like this. Make it go over a second time, over just really lightly, like that, just to highlight some spots. So after highlighting like this, I'm going to go ahead and grab some slate gray for the rocks down here at the bottom. And it's a lot lighter, and I am going to wash it afterwards. Next, I'm going to put really small red dots right on the eyes. I mean, really small. I don't know if you can see that. Let's pretend like there are. And then here for the claws, I'm just going to do white. Then I'm going to take my dark tone and just wash the base. You might ask, why am I washing the base if I primed it black so that I don't need to bother washing anymore? Which is true, but for stones, I like to give it a wash just to give it some shading and make it a little darker. So we'll wait for that to dry, and all I have left is putting green along the base. Okay, I'm going to grab russet brown and do the horse. So I'm not going to go through every step of painting, but just show you a little bit at least. And I am basically, just like all the other miniatures, going over different colors and spots to change things up a little bit between all of the different miniatures. And Roger and I decided that we wanted to make all of the archers sort of in a green color scheme. And we thought about, you know, randomly painting the armies in different colors because, as you mentioned before, the regular army just couldn't afford color-coded uniforms. And so oftentimes most of the army just wore whatever clothes that they had without any real distinguishing marks on them. But for gameplay reasons, we decided it would just be better to make all of the archers in relative green, like this. And so we'll vary it up a little bit. So for example, here the darker green is the tunic, and I will make this cowl the lighter green and vary it up a little bit that way. But you can pick whatever colors you want, obviously. You don't have to make the same choice. You could make it random, like what the real armies were like. But it's up to you. Also, it's a lot faster when you have a color scheme and you're only picking a couple of colors to put on your figures. As you can see here, I just did multiple colors to various parts there, and there are a lot of parts on these archers on horseback. So there's a lot of different colors to do. And right now I am doing tanned leather color. As you can see, I didn't try to shade or anything. I did solid colors everywhere, including the horse. But I think it turned out pretty well. I thought about washing the horses, but I think they're actually okay as is. So here's a gray one in comparison. I did the saddle a little bit in brown, and I'm trying to figure out, probably with this one because it's gray, I'm going to keep the cloth right here black, but maybe here with these guys I'll do gray. Alright, we're going to be doing the Seargents-at-Arms, which are these dudes here. And I'm going to do their cloak multiple colors, and so I'm going to be showing you chestnut gold. The cloak is pretty much just underneath all of the chainmail around his throat. And also he has a belt here I want to keep black. It sort of forms this skirt down here. Followed it around, and the belt is a double belt, so make sure you don't cover those up. Let's put a little more paint right here. up right here, arm, over to the other arm, and then go around the scabbard, and again the belt back here, and finally the arm, sword arm. And that's it. So what I decided to do is, since there are 12 of these guys, I grouped them into threes and I'm painting them different colors. So this is the chestnut gold, and then this guy is orange brown, and then this guy is the auburn shadow color, this one, and then this guy here is sapphire blue. Alright, so here I'm going to use russet brown. So let's grab our guy here, and there's a couple of things I'm going to color brown, and you can choose obviously different colors if you want, but I'm going to leave the belt black and make his scabbard this brown. And so basically you got those two parts, and then I think I'm going to do his boots brown as well, although it is viable to keep them black if you want to. So maybe some of the boots I'll keep black and other ones I will paint brown. And also you can switch the belt up as well, and I'll show you that too. So they're done with this guy. And then another guy I'll grab, and I'll actually make his belt brown and his scabbard keep it black and the boots black. So just color the belt like this. Flip them over. Color that, and then where it wraps around the scabbard, those two spots there, and then you can keep the scabbard black as well as his boots. Alright, so I'm going to be using blood red for all of the shields, and I'm just going to be doing the inside. Because I want the edge of the shields to actually be silver. So I'll be careful not to get it on the edges here, and just leave that black. There. Alright, we're going to go ahead and paint the base. And I know usually this is our last step, but because I need to spray dull coat on the models before I put the silver on, so I'm going to go ahead and do the base so that it also gets protected. And it's not a big deal that the silver isn't going to have a layer of protective spray on it. At the end of the day, I think protective spray was really needed when we had metal or pewter miniatures. But with plastic minis, I noticed that there's less of a need because paint tends not to come off as easily on plastic miniatures. Alright, I'm going to show you how to spray protective spray over them, and I use my Tester's dull coat. This is what I've been using for a long time, but today I'm going to experiment because I heard of a new dull coat sprayer that works really well, and this is Krylon's Frosted Glass. I've heard a couple of other people on YouTube use this with great effect, but you have to be careful with this because it actually does frost your mini, so you have to put a very thin layer on. But some have said that this works even better at creating a matte surface than Tester's dull coat. So I'm going to go ahead and spray this side with Tester's and this side with the Krylon Frosted Glass and see which one is better at actually creating a matte finish. Also, you'll notice that on these guys, I'm spraying them before I put the silver on, because as you notice, the silver right now is pretty shiny, and when you spray dull coat or protective matte spray, it makes it not shiny anymore. So that's why I have a tendency to spray it first with protective spray and then put the silver on, and I'll show you a comparison of before and after of what it looks like. But let's go ahead with dull coat first. And remember, this guy here, his highlights will actually darken a little bit, and that's one of the effects of spraying. And you don't have to put a whole lot on. Since painting plastic miniatures, I've been putting only one coat of spray. Otherwise, I used to do 3 coats. And so now I don't actually even know if you need protective spray anymore, because there's a couple of models that I haven't sprayed, and it doesn't seem like the paint is wearing off or chipping off, but I think this is a good step to take anyway, just to protect your models, especially if you spend a lot of time painting them. So I'm going to go ahead now and do frosted glass. I'm going to be careful because I do not want them to frost over. So let's see how this goes. And I'm noticing actually a little bit of frosting on these guys. So I didn't, and you notice I didn't put as much on them as I did the others, but we'll see if it's effective in making this take some of the shine away. Alright, so let's go ahead and do a comparison here. Now these two I did not spray at all, and you can tell that their helmets are pretty shiny, although the ones that I washed are dull, because when you put the wash over the silver, it takes away the shine. Now let's compare that first with the ones that I sprayed with the frost. And as you noticed, I was afraid to spray a lot of it on there, so some of these helmets are still pretty shiny. I was afraid to spray more because as you notice here on this guy, there's a little bit of frost that you can see on the black. I don't know how well you can see that, but I didn't want to have a lot of frost on there, so I only sprayed over it twice. Like you can tell on his sword, it has a couple of white dots, really fine white dots as a mist. And so I didn't really want to get that all over, so it might have not been very effective in providing a good even coat over these, because a lot of these helmets are still pretty shiny. So I wonder about the effectiveness of the frost if you're only able to make 1 or 2 passes over them like you saw me do. Like this knight here, you can tell a little bit more, but there's definitely some frost on the black parts of this mounted knight. So I don't know if I'm very impressed with using that spray as a protective coat. Now let's look over here on this right and again compare it to the ones that I didn't spray at all, and you'll notice that actually the helmets are no longer as shiny as these ones here. So definitely I got more coat, protective coat and spray on these guys. So I think my conclusion from this little experiment is to go ahead and still use dull coat, even though the Krylon frosted glass would have been a lot cheaper, because you saw that huge bottle is about the same price as that small bottle of testers. So unfortunately, I don't think that the frosted glass is going to work. If you check out the Werewolf, you'll notice that the gray highlights are a little bit more muted. Some people do want the shiny helmets, and so they'll do what I did with these Seargents-at-Arms, where because they have a lot more silver on them, I went ahead and waited and did my protective spray first, and now I'm going to go back and put silver on them. But it's sort of up to you. Some people don't care that the helmets aren't shiny or the silver parts aren't shiny like it is here. They don't really care about the difference between these two. The difference is too subtle for them. This color, plate mail metal from Army Painter, and do all of the metal parts, which is starting with his helmet, and pretty much you're just, oops, pretty much you're just painting the whole thing. And then this thing around his neck, I don't know what that's called, and then his sword, and pretty much just going at it. And then in the picture here for the card, it looks like he does have a steel gauntlet right there. So I don't know whether or not to paint that or to keep it black. Maybe I'll just do a mix of both, so, and see what it looks like. So here, I'll just do that. And I'm sort of dry brushing, but silver, it's a little bit hard to dry brush. It pretty much covers the whole surface. The greaves down here, I can't tell 100% what this is, what's covering the legs, if it's just bands. I don't know. I don't know if it's actually armor, but just to match the top part, I'm making it silver. So there you have it. And I don't know whether or not to make the outside of the shield silver as well. So I'm going to try it and see if this looks better than the black. Okay, so looking at the two, honestly, I actually think I like the black better around the shield. So I'm going to go ahead and go back and repaint the edge of this black. And that actually means less painting for us, right? And with the horses, I'm going to do these tips silver, the arrow tip, although it's so tiny. I want to note something here real quick. If you notice, when I painted the silver on here, I left a little black line between the silver and the bow. And that just helps distinguish the silver, because if I would have gotten rid of that black line, it would have been hard to distinguish between the bow and the silver tip. So that's just a painting tip for you to just keep a black line, thin black line, to differentiate between the different colors. I also decided to go ahead and paint this dot silver right in the middle of the shields. Alright, so next I am going to use Game Color Polished Gold. Honestly, I don't know where or why I picked up this gold. You can use any gold that you have. And I'm coloring the hilt of the sword here, down here at the bottom, and then flip it over, do the other side. I got it onto the gauntlet quick. If you grab another brush with some water, you can usually rub it off if it hasn't dried. And it looks like it has dried in that short period of time. No, look at that. It came off. Came off, so it's always handy to have another brush. And there you have it. Alright, next we are going to color this champion, Knighted Champion, and there are multiple names that go with these miniatures. And in this set we will get 2 of them, and I already painted up this one pretty close to the color scheme of the card, and I will therefore with the second miniature make a different color scheme. So I started off painting the horse with tanned leather and just finishing that up and doing the ears. And don't forget here on the neck, on both sides, that one's a little bit hard to get to. So I'm going to go ahead and make his cloak jade green, also the reins. I'll probably have to do 2 coats, seeing how a lot of the black is still showing through. And for some reason, some colors are more opaque than others, and so has better coverage. And this green is not that great in covering, so I'll probably do a second coat. See how right there it's not covering very well there. On his chest, that is also colored. I'm going to go ahead and use orange brown. Do this blanket that's underneath. Making sure I'm not getting the feet. And there's more down here. Like that. Flip it over, do the other side. Next I'm going to grab my plate mail metal army painter. This will be almost dry brushing. Although sometimes it's hard to dry brush with silver because it's naturally sort of runny. Do the horse. Again, I'm leaving some black in there. And the chainmail is a little easier. And then I'm going to go ahead and paint the shield, the face of it, silver, because I think I'm going to try to put a transfer decal on there. Now for a little added detail, I'm going to use Palomino Gold for some of the trimmings. Alright, looks good. That was pretty easy. And this is optional, you do not have to do this at all. But with the heroes, I like to do just a little bit more with them, just to distinguish them on the battlefield. Then we want to finish this guy off in the base with the avocado color. And then I switch to a bigger brush to do the rest. And usually I do 2 coats with these bigger bases. So I'm going to go ahead and try to put on a decal. So I'll just cut out this one here. This looks like it's good to fit on there. Alright, so I cut it out, and this might be a little bit tricky because I'm trying to get it on camera, but I go ahead and just dunk it in my water that I use. Now if your water is filthy, go ahead and replace your water, but basically hold it in there, I don't know, 30 seconds or so, until it basically can move. And so you sort of test it a little bit to see if it will move. Yeah, it does move. And then the trick is to get it to go where you want it to go. So I just use my thumb. Other people use a brush. Just slide it right on there like that. And then you want to move it exactly in the position you want. You got to be careful. Let's go ahead and try using a brush to position it. See, the brush doesn't have enough grip to move it. And if it won't move, a little water. There it goes. Move it up a little, like that, to where you want it. And pretty much that is it. And then you wait for it to dry. Afterwards, you do want to spray the protective coat on there again, just to seal that in place. I'm not going to videotape that, but just a really light coat. So that's pretty much it for this week's episode of Painting Without a Noob. We're getting a lot of miniatures finished, and so that's really encouraging and gaining momentum for us to finish these up. But next week's video, we're going to take a break from the miniatures, and we're going to tackle the buildings that come with this game, because they are awesome looking. And so tune in next week for another tutorial. Go ahead and subscribe here and click on my other videos. But until next time, have fun.